Hello and welcome everyone to this MSSO webinar, Standardized MedDRA Queries. My name is Suzanne Insur Shaker or Shaker, both pronunciations are correct. I will be your instructor for today. I'm joined by my colleague, Hannah Eaton, who is an MSSO training coordinator, and she will be kindly facilitating our session today. So to start off with some introductions, I'm a medical officer with the MedDRA MSSO team. I'm based out of New Jersey on the East Coast of the United States. Prior to joining the MSSO, I had about 20 years experience in the industry within different pharmaceutical and CRO teams as part of various functional groups. And although this particular webinar is not strong on interactivity sessions, we do have a few polling questions coming up. So this is our link to the poll EV. You can either access it through the link on your screen. If it asks you for a username, you can either skip that or use MedDRA123 or use the QR code because it gives us the chance to get to know you a little bit better. So I'll just leave it on for a minute or so to give you folks the chance to log on. The log on is also in the chat feature of the GoToWebinar. And we'll start with questions of where you're joining us from today, what roles or functions you perform, and what kind of experience level do you have with MedDRA? Oh, wonderful. I see we already have answers coming in. And just as a reminder, this webinar is scheduled for 2 hours. We do have a lot of information to go over, and I'm hoping to cover all of it today. If you have interest in other informations about specifically relating to coding, we do have webinars specific to those topics. So you can check out our calendar on our website and join us for those. Thank you so much. I see so many responses coming in. This is wonderful to see so many folks from different parts of the world. Thank you so much for giving us part of your day-to-day. If it's early day in the day for you or late in the day for you, welcome and thank you for joining. This is a wonderful slide, but for the interest of time, let's just keep on going. And the second question is, what roles and functions do you perform? Can be more than one, so however many apply to you can be selected, and it can be from previous lives as well. This is wonderful. And just as a reminder, as we go through the slides, if you have any questions on any of the topics we cover, please feel free to post them in the chat in the GoToWebinar panel. And Hannah will be monitoring the chat and she'll bring them to my attention as we go through the slides. We will also try to give enough room for Q&A at the end. So this is a nice cross-sectional view of the folks on the line. I think we are typically, as we see in many of our webinars, heavy on the PV part of the industry. So welcome everybody, welcome you to everyone. The next question is, how experienced are you in MedDRA? So you don't have to be experienced to attend this course, but it gives us an idea of how familiar you are with MedDRA and the jargon that we're going to be using as we go through the course. Okay, so I'm very happy to see that we also have folks from across the spectrum in terms of experience with MedDRA. Most have 2 to 5 years, so good to know. Okay, and then the final question is, have you previously attended the webinar for data analysis and query building with MedDRA? It's not a prerequisite for this course, but it will make your progression through it easier for you. We do offer that webinar on a regular basis, and it is also offered on our YouTube channel as a recording. So if you haven't had the chance to see it, it may be beneficial to you as part of your dealings with data analysis, query building with MedDRA, and your introduction to SMQs. So I see the majority have not attended that webinar. So thank you for your responses. Okay, so let's get started. So this is our introductory slide, and we offer it on all our webinars, just to kind of a reminder that MedDRA was created in the 1990s under the auspices of the ICH. So MedDRA is an ICH standard. It is an M1 standard, and I like to start always with the view on our website, there is the quick link or the icon for the ICH logo on the top right-hand corner. You see it there. When you click on that logo, it takes you to the ICH website. And if you look through the ICH work products and the ICH guidelines, you'll see all the guidelines that they offer. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the quality guidelines, the safety guidelines, the efficacy guidelines. We also have the multidisciplinary guidelines, which kind of overarch all of these three topics. And if you click on multidisciplinary guidelines, MedDRA is the first one. So MedDRA is an M1 ICH standard, and it shows you the implementation status of MedDRA in the different regions of the world. So I like to kind of show that slide when we first start. The activities of the MSSO team that I belong to are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee, which in turn is composed of the different ICH members, the parties, the MHRA, Health Canada, and WHO as observer. This is our disclaimer and copyright notice, basically saying that the slides are also copyright owned to the ICH, but they have been shared with you. They are currently in the handout section of the chat feature, and they are available to you for use. So you are allowed to use them with the exception of the logos for MedDRA and ICH. And of course, if you do make any changes to the slides, these changes have to be demarcated and in no way insinuated that they have been endorsed by the ICH. The second bullet point is the disclaimer that the slides are provided as is without warranty of any kind. And the third one would not apply because we do not have currently any third-party material within our slides. So during today's course, we're going to go over the content of a particular document called the MedDRA Data Retrieval and Presentation Points to Consider document. This is the ICH endorsed guide for MedDRA users when you are approaching MedDRA with the intent of performing data retrieval and data presentation, including SMQs. We will be focused on SMQs for this particular webinar, so we'll discuss the features of the SMQs, their background, data characteristics, what the versioning of MedDRA has as an impact on the SMQs, their benefits, the limitations. We'll do a demo of the SMQ analysis tool that you all have access to as part of your subscription to MedDRA. We'll give examples of SMQ applications and offer 2 clinical scenarios to highlight those applications. And we'll touch on the creation of customized searches and conclude with a Q&A session. So the document that we'll be discussing in a bit of detail is called the Data Retrieval and Presentation Points to Consider document. And I want to show you where you can access that document. So let me take you back to the meddra.org website. And there's 2 ways that you can access those documents. So we have under How to Use tab, under the support documentation, it will open up the view with different colored ribbons. The blue ribbon on top has all the PTC, the Points to Consider documents, which are the ICH endorsed guides. The second way that you can access this same area is up here on the quick links area. So the quick links on top have quick links to the self-service application that you can use to retrieve your own credentials to MedDRA if you don't have them. The WBB, the browser, which we'll be going into later on in the session. And here's the PTC link, the Points to Consider. So when you click on that, it takes you to the same page with the blue banner defaulted open. So you'll notice there's more than one Points to Consider document. So the one on top is the MedDRA term selection. And when we say MedDRA term selection, we do mean coding, because when you are coding in MedDRA, what you're doing is you are selecting a lowest level term, an LLT term that already exists in MedDRA. That is the closest match to your verbatim term that you want to code to MedDRA. So when you're coding in MedDRA, what you're doing is you are selecting an existing term in MedDRA. So there is a Points to Consider document for that is ICH endorsed. It also has a companion document here on the bottom for folks interested in more details on topics such as medication errors. And here's the document we're going to be going through in a bit more detail today in different formats. So you have it in PDF, Word, and HTML. And this is the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. You can download it. You don't need username and password for these documents. The gray banners on the bottom are version specific. These are support documentations produced by the MSSO with every version release of MedDRA. So they have the introductory guide to MedDRA, and there's also an introductory guide to the SMQs in MedDRA that is version specific. This document is really very helpful. It has a lot of information on how to use the SMQs and details on each individual SMQ. So these are very good resources for you when you're dealing with SMQs in MedDRA. So let me just go back to the slide. So the PTC document is an ICH endorsed guide for MedDRA users. It provides options for data retrieval and presentation for the industry and regulatory purposes. The best use will be enhanced when it is used in conjunction with the other PTC document that we showed you, the MedDRA term selection document. And of course, if you don't have your own organization specific guidelines for data retrieval, we do recommend that this be used as the basis. If you do have your own, which is a very good practice, if you have your own organization specific guidelines for data retrieval, then we do recommend that they are consistent with the guidelines presented in this document. This particular document is developed by a working group of the ICH Management Committee, and all PTC documents are updated annually with our March release of MedDRA. So we have two releases of MedDRA. There's the March release and there's the September release. And in March, we do provide updates to the PTC documents. There are complete versions in the six languages you see on your slide. And there are condensed versions available in additional 9 languages. These documents, as we showed you, are available on the MedDRA website and on the JMO website. The JMO is the Japanese Maintenance Organization, because when MedDRA was created, it was created in 2 languages, English and Japanese, and the JMO is the one maintaining the Japanese language. The MSSO is the one maintaining the remaining languages. So the PTC document covers a wide range of topics. The first 2 main sections for general principles and general queries and retrieval are covered in a lot of detail in our other webinar, the data analysis and query building webinar. So I won't go into too many details here, but just to kind of touch base on the general principles, when we talk about quality of source data, as everybody knows, if you want good quality output, you need good quality input. And when we talk about source data, in the understanding of data retrieval and presentation, we're talking about 2 types of source data. Not only the source data that you're receiving from your reporters, your verbatims, but also how you are carrying through that quality through your quality coding. So coded MedDRA data is also your source data. And of course, it stresses the importance of documentation practices. So documentation ensures that you are consistent with ICH endorsed points to consider. Documentation is very important when you're addressing questions or addressing audits. They serve you when you're onboarding new folks, and they preserve the continuity of knowledge in case of turnovers or changes in your team members. And examples, of course, of what types of information you capture in documentation is which MedDRA versions you're using for coding and for data analysis, how you're making your decisions for up-versioning with every release of MedDRA, what are your search strategy methodologies that you are implementing in your organizations, what are the processes that you are using for creating and maintaining any customized MedDRA queries, and what are your quality assurance procedures. The idea of altering MedDRA, this is a very important point. We always stress that MedDRA is a standard. It is used as a standard across the industry. So if you change MedDRA in any way, you're changing that standard, you're compromising that integrity of that standard. So even if you are asked to change a primary system organ class allocation by a client or by a member of your team, you should not alter MedDRA. So that's a very important point that we like to stress. Even if you're able to make changes to MedDRA, please don't change the hierarchy of MedDRA because it is a standard. It's meant to be used as such. And in terms of organization-specific data characteristics, it is important for you to understand how your own organization approaches MedDRA, because even though MedDRA is standardized, the way that you can apply MedDRA can be changed or can be customized to different organizations. So for example, when you're configuring your database, are you allowing your users to view MedDRA and to display MedDRA by both primary and secondary pathways, or are you only restricting it to primary pathways and primary system organ classes? Are you allowing the different level hierarchies to be displayed and used, like the high-level terms, the HLTs, the high-level group terms, the HLGTs, or not? Are you using synonym lists? And if you are using synonym lists, are you using them at a global level in your company, or is it per team? What are your data conversion approaches if you do have legacy data coded to other terminologies? Are you coding on a one-to-one correlation, or are you allowing more than one MedDRA term to be selected per verbatim? So those are the kind of considerations you want to think about in your organization-specific data characteristics. And when we talk about characteristics of MedDRA that impact data retrieval, also the hierarchy of MedDRA. MedDRA is multi-axial, meaning that preferred terms in MedDRA can be linked to more than one system organ class if they belong to more than one system organ class. The grouping terms, the HLTs, the HLGTs in MedDRA are characteristics that can be very useful to you in your data retrieval and analysis. All these topics, like I said, are covered in more detail in our other webinars. So if you're interested, please pull up a recording from our YouTube channel and take a listen. In terms of MedDRA versioning, we're going to touch base on that in the upcoming slides. And for this particular webinar, we will be covering the last two topics in more details, the SMQs and the customized searches. So MedDRA is released twice per year, like we said, the March release and the September release. The March release is sometimes also called the complex release because it is allowed in that release to have any changes, if we had any, across all levels, all hierarchy levels of MedDRA. But the September releases are called simple releases because in the September releases, we only produce or release changes at the lowest level term and the preferred terms only. When you are considering querying in MedDRA, you have to be very careful that the version you're using in your queries matches the version that you used in your coding. Those two versions have to match. And that's one of the most important takeaways from this webinar, is that when you're analyzing in MedDRA, when you're querying using customized or standardized queries in MedDRA, the version that you use for that search must match the version that was used for the coding. And we also offer resources to kind of walk you through MedDRA version releases. So with every release of MedDRA, there's a document called the What's New document as part of that gray banner that we showed you. And it walks you through, compared to the previous version, what changed in MedDRA. And for every release packet that is provided to you through the MSSO, there is a version report. That's an Excel sheet, very detailed with a lot of different tabs, going through the exact details of what was updated or changed or modified with that release. And of course, you have the MVAT tool, the MedDRA version analysis tool. It also allows you to do that comparison between different versions of MedDRA and allows you to input your own data and assess the impact of a version on your data, of a version update on your data. For this particular webinar, we will not be doing a demo of MVAT, but a demo was done in the previous webinar. We'll just be giving you kind of a quick overview of what the MVAT tool does. The MVAT tool is free to all MedDRA subscribers. It is accessed on our website through the link showed on the screen, and it has three main features. So the version report generator, it allows you to compare two different versions of MedDRA. They don't have to be consecutive versions of MedDRA, and then allows you to export that report in an Excel format. The data impact report is basically what it says. It allows you to import your data and assess the impact of a different version of your data. So if you're thinking about upversioning your data, this is a useful tool for you. When you import your data into the tool does not save your data. So you do need to export the output to save it. The third functionality is a search term change. So you can put in a single term within the tool, and the tool will identify the history of changes throughout the lifetime of that particular term. So even though we're not giving you a demo for this particular webinar on MVAT, and like I said, we have it on our other webinar on our YouTube channel, but there is a training material page on our website. So let me just show you how to access that. So under the training tab, there is a training material offer. And under tools, if you click tools and kind of scroll down, there's the MVAT demo in 2 parts in English language, part 1 and part 2. It's very helpful. So if you are interested in kind of testing out the tool, this is a helpful resource for you. Okay, let's start in the meat of today's presentation. So SMQs. So before we start with the presentation from our end, I just want to ask a few questions and kind of gauge your knowledge about MedDRA. So just a few basic questions. When you're doing data coding in MedDRA, which level of MedDRA do you code to? Okay. Okay, so I'm very happy to see this because the majority of you did get it right. The lowest level term in MedDRA is the term that is the most numerous. It has the most number of terms. So in version 27, we have about 88,000 or so. And it kind of makes sense why the coding is at the LLT level. The LLT level has the highest number of terms. The coding in MedDRA, like we said, you are selecting one of these LLT terms that is the closest one to your original verbatim. So that's why you have so many of them. But many of them are related to each other. They're called, they may be sibling LLTs. So like, for example, synonyms or quasi-synonyms. And they are basically telling you the same thing, but in different words, in different dictions, to kind of be able to match to the original verbatim as much as possible. So for example, when we say abdominal pain, you can say also other terms like tummy ache or belly ache or abdominal cramps or even colic. They all mean the same thing. These are all LLTs. So when you're coding in MedDRA, what you are doing is you are selecting one of these LLTs that is the closest one to your verbatim. What about when you are analyzing in MedDRA? So when you are performing data analysis in MedDRA, which is the level of MedDRA that is used for data analysis? So when you're analyzing in MedDRA, and I'm also very happy to see this response. So the preferred terms are unique medical concepts in MedDRA. We said that LLTs, there's so many of them, about 88,000, and they are offered in so many different ways to kind of represent options for you to be able to be as close as possible to your reported verbatim. And we gave the example, abdominal pain can also be reported as tummy ache or belly ache or a cramp or a colic. One of these sibling LLTs would be preferred to all the rest to represent this unique medical concept, and that's what we say are preferred terms. Preferred terms are the ones usually used when you are reporting to regulatory authorities, and they are usually used when you are analyzing. But folks who are thinking of system organ classes are also correct, because when you are analyzing data, you want to be able to leverage the standardization and the summarization that's already embedded in MedDRA for you. Because what happens is, as you go through higher in the hierarchy in MedDRA, the preferred terms that are related to each other in a medically significant way are grouped together in the next level, which is the high level term, the HLT level. And this grouping can be based either on anatomy or pathology or physiology or function. So there's already grouping into the HLT. So had you selected HLT, you would also be correct. And related HLTs are also grouped together at the next higher level term, which is the HLGT, the high level group terms. They are also grouped in a medically significant way. So if you also select HLGT, you would also be correct. And the HLGTs are finally grouped at the system organ classes, and there's only 27 of them. And the system organ classes, the collection of terms within it is driven either by manifestation, site of manifestation, by etiology, or by purpose. So most data analysis starts at, let's say that, it starts at the PT level, but you can also leverage the higher levels built in within MedDRA at the HLT level, at the HLGT level, and definitely at the system organ class level. Okay, and one final question, and this will be our final poll for today, is approximately how many level 1 SMQs do you think currently exist in MedDRA? And it can be a guess, you don't have to know for sure, but approximately how many level 1 SMQs do you think we currently have in MedDRA? And it's a funny slide. I like looking at the slide because the answers do tend to be like we're seeing today. So some folks just pick all of them. And I'm not going to give you the right answer right now. We do have the right answer coming up in a slide, but please bear these numbers in mind and see if you kind of were in the correct ballpark or not. But let's leave it at that and pay attention when we get to that slide to see if you got the right one or not. Okay, so what is a query? So a query basically is a way for you to answer a medical question. A query is a collection of terms within MedDRA, typically at the preferred term level, but like we said, the preferred term represents a group of sibling LLTs that kind of all mean the same thing, but in different ways of saying it. So the query represents all these terms that are related to an area of interest. So if you're interested in a particular medical condition or a particular safety signal or a particular medical area, and you want to understand whether or not in your database you have cases that can fall under this medical condition, what you're doing is you're running your database against this collection of related medical terms and see if you get a hit. These related medical terms are not necessarily all falling under the same system organ class. So for example, if you're interested in a particular area in the renal system, you will start with the, renal system organ class. That's a very clear and logical place to start. But you could also say that there may be investigations that I'm interested in about the renal function. There may be procedures or surgeries that would have only been done for a subject who has this kind of renal disorder that I'm interested in. Or maybe even that they have pre-existing conditions that are risk factors that would be of interest to me. So the query, when it's built, it's not necessarily from a single system organ class. So like we said, the grouping of these terms that will be answering your question related to a medical condition or an area of interest may convey the name of the diagnosis itself, the name of the syndrome itself. It may be signs or symptoms related to that condition. It may be physical findings, and it may be lab tests, other test data, or even surgeries or procedures. They're all intended to help you identify cases of interest. And why do we do this? So here's the answer to that slide. How many level 1 SMQs we have in production? Why are we running queries in the first place? We have 110 level 1 SMQs currently in production. And when you look through the slide, all of them are conditions that you really don't want to see with patients using your product. You don't want to see anybody suffering from an anaphylactic reaction who received your product, or convulsions, or ischemic heart disease, or even getting pregnant while using your product. You really want to know if that happens, or if they're not responding. There's a lack of efficacy or lack of effect. So as you're looking through this list of SMQs, each one of these is a medical area of interest that would be very important for you to know if it's happening on subjects receiving your particular product or exposed to your device and such. Okay, so we said one of the valuable resources for you within that gray banner is the introductory guide for the SMQs. The introductory guide for SMQs gives you details about each of these 110 SMQs individually. It gives you the inclusion-exclusion criteria, how it was built, and it gives you details about how it was designed, with what in mind, and it gives you a bit of idea about the type of SMQ that it is, and we'll go through the types in the next slide. So, data characteristics of SMQs. For a term to be included in the SMQ, we said we build the SMQs at the PT level. Each PT will have the subsumed LLTs within it, but there are characteristics for the PTs for broad versus narrow, and broad versus narrow will give you an idea of how well that preferred term will give you as a signal to this condition. If it's narrow, it means it's very specific. You have a very high chance of identifying these cases. If it's broad, it means you're casting your net a bit too wide, but maybe if you dig deeper and you investigate that case, it may or may not fit into your condition. We also have algorithmics SMQs, and algorithmic SMQs have a bit more complicated build because the idea is that they're helping you identify particular patients. So maybe there are a lot of broad terms, but they all belong to the same patient. You would really be interested in that one patient if they had a lot of these broad terms applied to them. And that's where the algorithmic SMQs come in handy. Hierarchical SMQs, when we talk about hierarchy, we're thinking about medical areas of interest that are really broad. So there's really a lot of information to be covered, and it may not be very practical for all of them to be covered in one grouping, in one SMQ. So they'll have subsumed or daughter or son SMQs within them. So they will have subsumed groupings within the SMQs, and we'll give you examples as we go through the slides. And then the other data characteristics for the SMQs are the term status and the SMQ status. So if an SMQ has been inactivated, and there's one SMQ that has been inactivated to date, the data characteristics within the tool, within the browser, will give you that information. And then if a term that was selected to be part of that SMQ has become inactivated, that information is also available to you, as well as whether or not there has been term versionings within the SMQ. So all of this information is available to you as part of the information that can be accessed, whether on our tool, in the browser, or in the information that is bundled to you as part of your release packet. Okay, so when we said that when we are creating the SMQs, we usually create them at the PT level. It's also recommended when you're building your own queries to create at the PT level, because the PTs represent unique medical concepts. There are very few exceptions to that. And the common example that comes to mind is the infections, because when you think about the LLTs, the lowest level term, the lowest level terms are the most granular. Like we said, there's about 88,000 of them. They're the ones you use for coding. And they give you as much detail as possible within the builds of MedDRA to allow you to select the one that's closest to your verbatim. But some of this information within the LLT may be redundant to you in terms of analysis. Like we said, the exception may be the infections, because in the infection LLTs, you have it drilled down all the way to the species. So the pathogens would be at the PT level, but maybe the species information is at the LLT level. If that is of interest to you, then would be maybe a good opportunity or a good chance to start building your queries at the LLT level. But typically, the MedDRA queries, and especially the SMQs, they are built at the PT level, but the LLTs subordinate to that PTs are still in that SMQ. So if you run your data against your PTs, if you have your data at the PT level, or if you have your data at the LLT level, you can still run them against the SMQs. And just looking through the numbers in the slide, as you're going from the LLT level at the bottom all the way to the top, you see how the numbers contract and become smaller and smaller. This is how MedDRA actually has a built-in feature to standardize, summarize, and aggregate, all built into MedDRA. So it is a good feature for you to kind of leverage these different level hierarchies in MedDRA. Okay, we talked about narrow versus broad. We kind of touched base on it a little bit, and I want to go into this a little bit in more details. So most SMQs have both narrow and broad preferred terms. We only have about 8 SMQs which only have narrow scoped terms. They don't have broad. But the rest of them all have narrow and broad. And when you think about narrow scope, narrow means you have the greater likelihood of identifying cases of interest. So they're highly specific. So this could be, for example, the diagnosis itself. If you're looking for cardiac failure and you have a preferred term of cardiac failure, that's a very specific term. So that will help you identify cases of interest. So narrow means highly specific. The broad is a bit more wider net. When you cast your net a bit widely, that becomes broad. So broad is sensitive because it captures everything. It may or may not be applicable to your particular area of interest or your particular question. So for example, it could be a general sign or a general symptom that happens in your condition, but may also happen in other conditions as well. And that's why it's broad. So narrow terms are highly specific. Broad terms are very sensitive. When you run your data against an SMQ that has both narrow and broad terms, you have the option to run it only for narrow terms. Maybe you have a large number of terms in your database, and you just want to run it against the narrow because you want to be very specific. This helps you do that. If you run it against the broad search, you're not excluding narrow. Of course you won't exclude narrow. Why would you ever want to exclude specific narrow terms, right? So when you run an SMQ, the tool allows you to select if you're doing it on a narrow basis, only looking for the specific terms, or on a broad basis, meaning you're looking for everything. So here's an example. Let's say that you're interested in lactic acidosis. For this particular SMQ, the narrow search terms are very few. There's only 3 of them. Because if you have a term coded to lactic acidosis, that's a direct match, right? So that's a very specific term. What about hyperlactocidemia? That's also very, very close match. But when you start looking at broad terms, so for example, if you have blood pH decreased, it may or may not be related to lactic acidosis, but there are other conditions. It may be respiratory acidosis, it may be metabolic acidosis, so not necessarily lactic acidosis. But are you interested in that standalone? So if one of your cases only had blood pH decreased, would you be interested in retrieving that or not? This is the kind of decision you can make with your team. Now, when you talk about algorithmic SMQs are very helpful to you when you want to run them against your specific subjects. So when you're thinking about algorithmic SMQs, you want to think about a built-in algorithm within the SMQ that provides for a combination of terms. If all these combination of terms are retrieved in a single case, then that's your case of interest, rather than isolated broad search terms. So it's a better way of identification. We don't have a lot of algorithmic SMQs. We only have about 10 algorithmic SMQs, and here's an example of one of them, anaphylactic reaction. So anaphylactic reaction has, just like the other SMQs, narrow terms and broad terms. The narrow search terms, like we said, are highly specific. So the algorithm would say, if my case has any of these highly specific terms, I want it to be captured in the SMQ. So if they had a shock reported, if they had an anaphylactic shock reported, or if they had circulatory collapse reported. Any of these is highly specific. So the algorithm will capture that. But what about if they only had erythema? Is that something you're interested in? So standalone erythema may be too broad. It may be too broad. It may not really be indicative of an anaphylactic reaction. But if the same patient had erythema as well as bronchial edema, maybe that's a better case to look more closely into. Or if the same patient had angioedema and also had a decreased blood pressure, that may be a better case to retrieve and look into. So basically what the algorithm is doing is telling you, okay, I'm going to retrieve for you all the specific terms, all the narrow search terms, and if you give me your data and you give me your subject numbers, I'm going to tell you if you have a subject that captures events that are reported under the airway terminologies like asthma and bronchial edema, plus angioedema urticaria grouping. I will do that for you. I'm going to tell you this subject has events that were reported under category B and under category C, or under category B and category D, or under category C and category D. So the algorithm does that for you. And here's how the algorithm kind of thinks through it. It starts with narrow terms. Does your case have any narrow terms? If the answer is yes, it's going to retrieve it for you and say, here's a hit. If the answer is no, it's going to look at the next level. Now it's going through broad terms. You see all of these red ones are broad terms. So if it hits on one of the B terms, it's going to start looking for a C term. If it finds it, it's going to say, yes, here's a case for you to review because this one particular patient is matching on more than one category, either B and C, or B and D, or C and D. If it doesn't hit on any of these, it's not going to give you any cases. It says, I ran the algorithm and I couldn't find any cases. So when we talk about hierarchical SMQs tend to be large groupings. They tend to be broad medical conditions that can be kind of focused in a bit more with these subgroupings. And when we talk about hierarchical SMQs, it's not the MedDRA standard hierarchy. We're not talking about HLTs and HLGTs. We're still talking about preferred terms that are narrow and broad, but that are being subsumed into subordinate SMQs. So here's an example. So when you talk about cytopenias, if you are interested for your particular product for cytopenias, are you interested in all types of cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, or are you only interested in platelets, in thrombocytopenia? If you're only interested in platelets, then you have a sub-SMQ for hematopoietic thrombocytopenia that you can run on its own. If you're not sure you want to run it against all of them, you can do that. If you want to run it against two of them, leukopenias and erythropenias, you can do that. So the nice thing about the hierarchical SMQs is that it allows you to run it against the parent SMQ, against one of the subordinate SMQs, or against multiples of the subordinate SMQs. Okay, each SMQ in the tool will give you information about the SMQ status, whether it's active or inactive, whether the terms within it are active or inactive. And one thing to kind of bear in mind is that once a PT has been included in an SMQ, that PT is never removed out of that SMQ. So for legacy data, you don't have to worry about figuring out what happened to my PT. It used to be in that SMQ. It will be marked as inactive so that you know, but it will always remain in that SMQ. It will never be taken out. Okay, so SMQ versioning. So every time we have a release of MedDRA, the medical team at the MSSO, they're going to review all the new PTs that were added to MedDRA or all the changes that were made to MedDRA, whether an LLT was, the status was made a PT, whether a PT was downgraded to an LLT. All those kind of changes are reviewed, and they make the decision as to what impact this has on the SMQs. So the nice thing about dealing with standardized MedDRA queries is that the SMQ versioning is being done for you by the MSSO team. And that's why it's really super important for you to match the versions when you're coding and when you're analyzing or when you're retrieving or when you're querying. If you do not match the version that you use in coding to the MedDRA version that you're using in your querying or in your analysis, the result of your output is not going to be accurate, right? So here's an example. So let's say that you're interested in breast cancers. And in version 23, a new PT was added to MedDRA for the hormone receptor positive breast cancer. And that was added to that SMQ. So the medical team made a decision that this is a significant PT to be added to the SMQ for breast malignant tumors. So they added that new PT. Your data was in 22.1. and you upversioned your data to 23, but you kept using the SMQ for 22.1. So when you did your analysis, you're not seeing those cases for hormone receptor positive breast cancer. Why? Because you're using the previous SMQ. The previous SMQ 22.1 did not have that PT. It's not looking for it. So it's not going to hit on your data if you have it. And of course, the opposite is also true. If you did not upversion your data, if you kept your data at 22.1, but now you're using a newer SMQ, you're not matching them because the SMQ is looking for something that's not there. So when you're saying, I'm not seeing these cases, it's because you didn't upversion your data. So it's super important, very important, that the version of MedDRA you use when you're coding is the same as the version of MedDRA you use when you're analyzing and when you're querying. So what are the benefits and limitations of SMQs? Of course, the SMQs apply across multiple therapeutic areas. So regardless of what your indication is, what kind of product you're using, what region you're working in, they all can be tested against these SMQs because they are standardized. They can be applied across the board. They are validated. Like we said, they are created by a medical team. They are reviewed with every MedDRA release by a medical team. So they are intended to be reusable with the same search logic. They are a standardized way of communicating safety information. So if you are a regulator, you are able to compare different producers or manufacturers of the same product using these standardized SMQs, or you are able to compare them against time. So you can compare your own data against time. It will be consistent in data retrieval because they are standardized, and the onus of the responsibility of maintaining them is not on you. It's on the MSSO and the JMO teams. The limitations of the SMQ is that even though we have 110 level 1 SMQs, and some of them are hierarchical, meaning that they have subsumed categories within them. In fact, when the total number of SMQs, if you count the hierarchical, reaches 230, they still don't cover every single topic of interest. It's just not possible to cover every single topic of interest. So if you have topics of interest that you keep thinking about and creating your own customized queries, please do submit those requests to us. We do take all of these requests seriously, and we are happy to investigate whether the topic can be made into a new SMQs. And the other limitation is that although the SMQs have been validated when they were created, so meaning that each one of these SMQs had a panel of experts discussing which terms to be added and which terms to be made narrow and which terms to be made broad, and for the algorithmic ones, how to create the algorithm, they also get tested at least by one regulator and at least by one industry participant. Still, when they are released and applied to larger and larger data in real life, we do get feedback to say that need refinement. So maybe something needs to be changed from a broad to a narrow, or from a narrow to a broad, or maybe something needs to be added, or maybe this term is creating too much noise now that it's being tested on a wider scale and needs to be tweaked. So SMQs do get tweaked. So that's a challenge, because when you are comparing your data across time, SMQs do evolve across time. Okay, before we go into the browser demonstration, Hannah, do we have any questions so far?
We have not received any questions yet.
Okay. Okay, so let me show you how to access the browser. So let me go back to our website and go back to our homepage and close the ICH website. Okay, so to access the browser, and like we said, we have temporary credentials available for you in the chat feature. So you are welcome to, test it out on your end if you're able to do so as we go along. You are also welcome to test it out afterwards. And if you have questions, come back to our help desk with any issues or any questions that you have. If you're not sure where your own credentials are, just to kind of give you a quick look, up here on the right-hand side, we said the SSA, the self-service application. It's a very quick way. If you're not sure what your MedDRA ID or MedDRA password is, you can request it, and all you need to get that is a valid email address with the domain of your organization. So if your organization has a MedDRA subscription, that's how you can retrieve your credentials. So going back to our homepage, there are two ways to access the browser. I'm going to demo using our web-based browser. There are two ways to get there. Under How to Use, under Tools, here. These are our browsers. These are our different tools, all available to you as a MedDRA subscriber. So under Browser, you can open the web-based browser from the top link here, or you can just go to our quick links and click on the WBB, and it takes you to our browser. And right on the landing page, you have the option to change your preferred language. So if your first language is not English and you're more comfortable with the interface being in a different language, you can select it from here. I am going to keep it at English, and I'm going to log in. And the browser defaults to the system organ class view. So you see here under the middle, I'm hoping that it's clear to everybody, under the middle section, the browser defaults to the system organ class view, the SOC view. It gives you the option to switch to the SMQ, but before we do that, let me just give you a quick look at the browser in the system organ class view. There's 5 different panels. The one on top, right across the board, that has these blue buttons. This is the panel for your settings and the panel for your tools. So when you're coding, this is the view that you're going to be using to select LLTs that are the best match for your verbatim. So in the middle here is your search function. So your search box is here, and you can put in either sections of words. So if I go with limb deform, I don't have to type in limb deformity. I can just put in limb deform, and it defaults to give me all levels of MedDRA, LLT, PT, HLT, HLGT, and system organ class that has these two roots within them, and it defaults to use the synonym list. So the synonym list, meaning that if I'm looking for heart failure, it's going to look up not just heart, it's going to look up cardiac, and it's going to look up cardio, and it's going to look up cardium, and it's going to look up heart. So it's going to give me all of these searches so that I don't have to put in cardio or heart or cardiac. It's going to do that for me. So it defaults to the synonym list trigger. It's going to ignore any diacritical marks. So if you are using a language that has diacriticals, like the French language or the Arab language, it's going to ignore the diacritical marks, and it's going to show me the matches with categories, whether it's a synonym match or it's a contains match, etc. So let's start it out with the limb deformity, and if I hit enter or I click search, it's going to give me the output. So the bottom panel is where my search results come out, and it has all the different levels. So it identifies the matches at the LLT level, the PT level, at the HLT level. And if I see any boxes in red, that means I allowed it to give me the non-current. So going back to the top on the ribbon, the top ribbon across, I allowed it to default to show me non-current LLTs. These are non-current, meaning I can't use them when I'm coding. They're just there for legacy purposes. Okay, I have the option to select up to 3 languages. So if I'm interested in French and I click French, I notice that the SOCs, the system organ classes, they show me the English because that's the first language here in yellow. And French, I'm starting to see French. I can also pick a third one, like let's do German. So now I'm seeing English, French, and German. And it allows me now to conduct my search in English, French, and German. So whatever languages I select, I'm also able to search in as long as I selected them. So going back to that limb deformity, if I now click enter, I'm going to see the same terms in 3 different languages. Okay. And then, of course, in the WBB, the web-based browser, the benefit to using this as opposed to the desktop browser, the desktop has the same features, is that the web-based browser allows me to look at supplementals. When I click supplementals, everything turns pink as a kind of reminder, as an alarm reminder that supplemental terms means they are terms that have been reviewed by the medical team at the MSSO. They are approved, but they have not yet been released. They are waiting on the next release. So you can see them, but you can't yet use them because they are not yet released. So if I put in limb and deform, and I hit enter, I'm going to see the same LLTs, but if there were any additions or changes with these, well, now I'm not going to see any because there are no new terms with limb deformity. But if I do see any, they will have this interrupted box around them saying this is the new term that was added. So let me go back to my defaults, and let me now show you the SMQ view. When I click on the SMQ, it's the same panels. So I still have the settings, the tools all the way on the top, and I still have my search function in the middle. And I can still put limb and deform, and I can still hit enter. And it still shows me the different levels. But you notice that I don't have PTs and I don't have LLTs, right? So it's a different count. When I was in my SOC view, let me just go back to my SOC view and I'm going to hit enter. When I was in my SOC view, I had a total of 17 terms that came out from my search. But in my SMQ, and I had the same roots and I hit enter, I only have 6. And the reason for that is when I'm in my SMQ and I'm searching up a term, it's only going to retrieve terms that are grouped already in SMQs, whether it's at the LLT level or at the PT level. So notice we don't have HLTs and HLGTs. Of course not, because we don't have HLT level terms and HLGT level terms within the SMQs. The SMQs are built on the PT levels and any subsumed LLTs. And if I click on any one of these terms, this right-hand panel is going to be populated with information. Any term I click on, the right-hand term, this is the term details panel. It's going to give me details of whatever term I'm on. So if I'm on an LLT, it's going to tell me what level of term I'm on. It's an LLT term right here. What the numeric code of that term is, what the full term is, and whether or not it's current. Now, currency is only at the LLT term in MedDRA. So currency, yes or no, will only be shown if I'm on an LLT term. It's also going to give me which SMQ this falls under with the numeric code of the SMQ, the name of the SMQ, and any additional details of the SMQ, whether this is a narrow scope or broad scope. Now, the LLT itself is not the narrow or broad, it's the PT that the LLT is under is the narrow or scope, but all the sibling LLTs that belong to that PT will have the same scope. And of course, whether it's active or not. And the category, all narrows are A's. So that's the only category. So all narrows are A's regardless of what type of SMQ this is. And then when it was added, so the addition version, this was added in version 10. And when it was modified, this term was last modified in version 14. So all of this detail is provided to me under the term detail. If I click on the PT, now I see the term details related to that PT. I can expand it and I see the SMQ. If I click on the SMQ, now I have the details of that SMQ, as much information as it can give me. Now on this left-hand side here are all my SMQs, all 110 of them, and some of them are hierarchical, so they have sub-SMQs, and some of them are algorithmic. When I'm doing my search for my terms, I can limit which SMQs I'm looking in. So for example, if I am interested in a general term like dyspnea, and I just want to see it in a particular term, like for example, let's say, is it under anaphylactic reaction? Let me put that as an example. Do I have the term for dyspnea under anaphylactic reaction? And I can click search. And it's going to tell me, yes, I found it under this particular SMQ, and here's my output. So here's my exact match for dyspnea, and here's my other terms that have dyspnea within them. But if I clear my selection, I'm no longer on the anaphylactic reaction, and I hit enter, it's going to give me more than one SMQs. So it's going to give me all the SMQs that I have that include dyspnea, regardless of which type of SMQ. So this one found one under pulmonary hypertension. So I thought this was a neat thing. You can also pick more than one SMQ at the same time. So if I'm looking for anaphylactic reaction as well as edema, I hit control and I hit the other SMQ. I can go as many as I like. And again, I hit search. And now it's limiting its search of this term to the particular SMQ. So this is a way that you can navigate and look as you go through. And just to kind of give you an idea of the SMQs themselves, so this is a top-down approach because I can go through each of these SMQs and look through them. Now, if I look at anaphylactic reaction and I expand the button next to it and I pull it down, here's my blue terms. My blue are my narrow. So these are all my specific terms. And here are my broad terms, all my red terms, all my broad red terms. And they have different categories. Like we said in that slide, not every asthma is an anaphylactic reaction, is a signal for anaphylactic reaction. But if I have an asthma in the same patient under category B with a, for example, face edema in the same patient, or for example, hypotension in the same patient, then I'm looking at a case that's worth pulling. And if I click on this SMQ, anaphylactic reaction, like we said, any term you click on, you're going to have the details on the right-hand side. It's going to give me a bit of description about the SMQ, where the source was for this description, and a note when you're running the SMQ about, what are the categories and how to define them and what each category means. And if I right-click on that SMQ and I choose details and occurrences, then I have the same information in printable form if I want to print it out. I also have the same information in that SMQ introductory guide. So I have this information. And also, when I right-click the SMQ, here's a nice feature. I can export this SMQ. So if I click on SMQ export, it's going to tell me you're pulling out the SMQ in English for version 27. This is the one you're pulling out. Do you want your inactive PTs? Let me just click yes for this one and say export. Right away, it's going to give me an Excel sheet. And when I open that Excel sheet up, here's my SMQ. It told me that I retrieved it in English, version 27, on such and such a date, and I chose to include any inactive PTs. And here are the details. So if I filter, I already have my narrows right there. I know what they are. And I have my broads. And I can share this information with my safety team, with my IT team, with any team that I want. Here's the SMQ I'm interested in. Can you please run this against my data? If I don't want the inactives will also always be highlighted because you don't need them. Don't use them when you're running the SMQs. They're inactive, right? So they're not part of this standardized SMQ. So even if you have fixed eruption, in your data is no longer part of this SMQ. So for whatever reason, part of that growth of the SMQ and development of the SMQ said that this may be too broad a term, we don't need it. So this is just an overview of the SMQs. And I think maybe, Hannah, at this time, let me ask first, do we have questions? And then we can take maybe a 5-minute break. Do we have any questions at this time?
We do not have any questions yet.
Okay, awesome. So maybe this is a good time for a 5-minute break, and we'll see you folks in 5 minutes.
Perfect.
So welcome back, folks. Hannah, are we good to proceed?
Yes, you are good to go.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so how do we use then the SMQ analysis tool? And I think that's part of the most exciting parts of the webinar is the demo of the tool. So just to give you a quick idea of how many browsers we have, we do offer the subscribers 3 different browsers. There's the desktop browser, the MDB, the web-based browsers that we just kind of looked at, the WBB, and there's a mobile MedDRA browser, which is a URL link. It's not an app, it's a link. And all 3 of them require your MedDRA ID and password to be able to use them. All 3 of them allow you to view search MedDRA terms either through the system organ class view or the SMQ view. All 3 of them allow you to select your own language for the interface and to run the search against the different MedDRA languages. And other than the mobile browser on your phone, you can export your search results on the desktop browser or the web-based browser. We did mention that the web-based browser has the additional benefit of showing you supplemental information for data that has been approved but not yet released. And of course, both the desktop and the web-based have the same features other than that. The desktop browser, the one thing to remind everybody, if you do download the desktop browser from our website, it has all the functionalities of the web-based browser to allow you to use it offline, but it's not already preloaded with the MedDRA files. So yes, you can use it, you can download it and use it offline, but you do need to remember to grab whatever MedDRA files you like in whatever language, whatever versions, and upload them into the tool. And then of course, every time we have a release, we don't have access to it once it reaches your desktop. So please remember to grab the new release and upload it to your desktop browser, but you can use it offline, which is a great benefit. And both of them allow you to view primary, secondary link information, to upload your own data and run it against the SMQ tools, and perform the advanced search options with the booleans for not or. So when you're running SMQs, the IT perspective, of course, is that SMQs are stored queries. Your own organization would have your own data, typically at the LLT level, may have it at the PT level. Whether you have it at the LLT level or the PT level, the tool will work. And even if you don't know which level your data is in, the tool will work. And both levels are provided to you in every release file in those SMQ ASCII files. When you load your data into the query, the data, of course, will be run against the SMQ to produce hits. You do need to remember to export that because the tool is not going to save your data. And the tool allows you the options of, are you looking across the board? Do you only want the narrow scope terms? Do you want the broad, which will retrieve both, like we said, narrow and broad? Are you only interested in algorithmic SMQs, and do you want to run that on your subjects? For this one, you'll need your subject IDs, or are you interested in any hierarchical SMQs? So let's have an example. Okay, so here's my data set. I have 33 events so far in my data set on 17 subjects. Do I have any hits for any SMQs? So before we start, I just want to show you what that report looks like. So if I show you the Excel that you can prepare, and you can prepare one on your own with a small group of terms from your data sets, and take a look. All you need are 4 columns. The fourth actually is only if you're running it algorithmic, but it's really interesting to run it algorithmic, so I do recommend that you use all 4 columns. So all you need is 4 columns. The first one is optional. It's a row ID. Whether you select to have row identifiers or not is optional, but the column is required. So even if you leave it blank, you still need to keep a column A. Column B would be your term columns, so either your LLTs or your PTs. So you have to have them in column B because the tool will be looking for them there. Column C is your numeric code of your terms. If you don't have them, that's fine. And also if you don't have the terms, that's fine. If you only have the codes, that's fine. If you're running your search in the English language of MedDRA, either one of these is sufficient as long as they are in this order. So the terms are in column B and the codes are in column C. For the English language, either one of them is enough. If you're running your queries on the language for MedDRA files other than English, then please use the codes. Please use the codes or have both terms and codes. And the reason for that is in English, we have American spelled terms and British spelled terms. When you translate that into a different language, it's the same translation in some of those languages. So you might have duplicates of terms, but you'll never have duplicates of codes in languages other than English. So just as a reminder, if you're running it in language other than English, please use the codes or both of them. And of course, your subject numbers are here, column D, for your algorithmic search. So this is basically all the information you have, or all the information you need to run your data against an SMQ. Very simple. So like I said, I have 33 events and I have 17 subjects in this mock data. So let's get started. So let me go into here I'm back again. Let me restore my defaults. I'm back again in my web-based browser. Whether I am in my system organ class view or in my SMQ view, my top ribbon didn't change. So it doesn't really matter. I can be in my SOC or I can be in my SMQ and still run the same tool. What I'm interested in is this tool here on the top right hand that says SMQ analysis. And just as an FYI, I'm a big fan of hierarchy analysis. We give demos of that hierarchy analysis in that data analysis and query building with MedDRA webinar. So if you're interested in that and how to look at your data in the secondary pathways using the secondary system organ classes, please take a look at one of those recorded webinars. It's super helpful. It's a very nice tool. But for today's webinar, this is our scope. So I'm going to click on SMQ analysis, and let me just show you what opens up. So the tool defaults to the language I'm on, which is English. I can change it, like I said, to any language that I have my MedDRA files in, but I'm going to be in my English. And one of the most important things that you need to take away is the version. Please select the version that your data is coded in. If you don't select the version your data is coded in, it's going to default to the most recent, and then your output may not be accurate. So please make sure that your selection matches your data, the coded version for MedDRA in your data. I'm going to keep it at 27, and it defaults to narrow. So when you don't do anything with the tool, it defaults to narrow search, but I can select broad and I can select algorithmic. So one of you may ask, well, what about the hierarchical? Why can't I select hierarchical? Well, actually, you can. The hierarchicals are all down here. Any SMQ with a plus sign next to it is a hierarchical SMQ. So here's examples. Biliary. Do you want every single biliary disorder? Are you only interested in neoplasms? If you're interested in neoplasms, it also has sub-SMQs. Do you want the ones that are benign or the malignant? And if you're malignant, are you looking for unspecified malignancy or is it biliary malignant tumors? So do you know which ones you like? If you don't know, you can select all of them. And you can select which SMQs I'm running my data against. So if I already know that I'm interested in anaphylactic reaction, this is the one that I'm selecting. Well, what about if I want anaphylactic reaction and I also want angioedema? I click by holding down the control button on my laptop and I click whichever SMQs I want. I can also do convulsions. I'm interested in these three. Or maybe I change my mind, I want all of them. I can clear my selection. The ones that are algorithmic SMQs, and remember we said we have 10 of those, it will tell you this SMQ is running an algorithm. Here's another one. Here's another one. As you go through all of them, you're going to see more and more SMQs with algorithms. One of them, and only one of them, is a weighted algorithm, and it's the SLE, the systemic lupus erythematosus. So this is a very unique SMQ. It has the only weighted approach when you're looking at this SMQ. And the reason why SLE has a weighted approach, systemic lupus erythematosus can present with a very wide selection of presentations. And I want to show you something in our, let me go back to our website and let me show you our PTC documents. And I want to show you our introductory guide for SMQs. And here's our individual SMQs. And if I scroll down alphabetically to find SLE, and I click on SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus has a wide range of presentations. So it's hard to limit the number of terms that are indicative of this because the broad ones can be very broad. So the way that they got over this, and just as an example, when you look at any SMQs, it will give you the definition, how it was defined. It will give you the inclusion criteria, what was excluded from this particular SMQ, and then a bit more details. So if it's algorithmic, it's going to tell you what are the algorithmic categories. And for SLE, there's a ton of them. It goes all the way from A to I. And we said A is always narrow, always specific, so you never want to miss A. But what about B? B has a wide range. Is every arthritis an SLE? No. But what if arthritis is mixed with other manifestations? So when they designed the algorithm for the SLE, they said, okay, some categories are more significant than other categories, particularly for SLE. We're going to give them a different numeric weight. So for example, serositis terms will have a weight of 3. Arthritis terms will have a weight of 3, but photosensitivity, that only carries a weight of 1. And when will the algorithm hit on one of your subjects? If one of your subjects either has a narrow term, because that's specific, that's highly specific, or if they match the algorithm whereby they have manifestations or reported events, something that you coded in MedDRA that satisfies multiple categories, and they all add up to more than 6, so 7 or more. So if your subject had an immunological disorder, they got a 3. If they also had an arthritis, that's another 3, that's 6. That's not enough yet. They need at least one more. So maybe a serositis or a renal disorder or a neurological disorder. So as long as they had enough collection of broad terms where the weight total is a 7 or more, then that case will hit for the SLE. So that's the only SMQ in our collection of SMQs that has a weighted approach. It counts when it does the algorithm. So going back to our tool. Okay, let me just open it up again. So we said it defaults to version 27. I'm okay with that. It defaults to narrow. I'm okay with that. And I'm going to keep it running against every single SMQ. I want to do a broad look, and I'm going to hit next. It needs my data. So this is just a reminder, just the same thing we said. It has to be in this order of columns. The first column is optional. Even if you leave it blank, that's fine, but you need to have a column A. It's going to start looking for terms in column B, whether they are at the LLT level or the PT level, and then it's going to look for codes. If it has the terms in English, that's fine. It doesn't need the codes as long as they are a match. If you input data that is wrong, so if you input data that is misspelled, or if you input data where the code is not the match for the term, it's not going to be able to verify that one particular row. It won't reject the entire Excel sheet, but it will tell you I couldn't verify row 12, for example, so I can't give you information about row 12, but I'll do the rest that I was able to verify. So if you do make a mistake, it will tell you. And then, of course, case ID is optional, but case ID is needed if you're going to look at your algorithmic SMQs, because algorithmic SMQs drill down on a patient level. And it reminds you also that if it's English, then please either put in the code or put in both of them. And your limit for now is 100,000. So I'm going to choose my file. So it's going to take me back to the options to go through wherever I'm storing my files. And here's my SMQ analysis exercise file. And then I'm going to hit next. If all my data was verified, it's going to run it. If it finds an error, it's going to give me a message and says, this particular row I couldn't verify. You want me to output the rest? Do you want to go fix it? So let's hit next. And my data is correct. There's no issues. So I'm going to open my Excel sheet. And it's very quick. It's a very quick output. So here's my output. And I can save this to my own folders. I can share it with my own team. If I don't export this, then the tool is not going to save my data. So I do need to save this so I can go back to it or run it again. So right off the top here, it's going to tell me that I ran it on this particular day and time in this particular language, and I selected my narrow because it was defaulted to narrow, and I selected all SMQs. So let me filter. I'm going to highlight the row with the headers and just go data and filter, right? And there's a lot of information as I scroll to the right. The kind of information as I scroll to the right is level 1, level 2, level 3. So what are all these levels? These are my hierarchical, because I didn't specify which hierarchical SMQ. I said just show me everything. So it's going to show me all the hierarchical, the sub SMQs that it hit on. But what kind of basic information is it giving me? The first 2 columns, here's my row ID because I had a row ID in my data. Here's my term because I had a term in my data, and even the code because I had a code in my data. So it repeated the information that I gave it, that I inputted. And then what did it do? Because I wasn't sure whether my term was LLT or PT, that's fine. It ran it regardless. But even if I gave it in LLT level, it's going to give me the PT. And if I gave it in a PT level, it's just going to duplicate it because it's going to give me the PT anyway. So whether my data that I inputted was at the LLT level or the PT level, it's still going to give me the PT output. And here's a very interesting column, column E. It's going to tell me which SMQs were matched on my data. Was it able to find a match or not on my data? But it seems to be all over the place. I'm not seeing an order. It's because it's already grouping them by my case ID. So it's in this particular input, I gave it my case IDs, and it's already started grouping them for me. Here's my subject number 1, here's my subject number 2, and so on and so forth. So I can filter by my subject. If I want to, I can look by one subject at a time and see which SMQs were matched, or maybe no SMQs at all were matched for that particular term. Or I can do all of them, and I can filter by SMQs. So I can look at it one at a time and say, okay, let me look at anaphylactic reaction and anaphylactoid shock. I want to see these two. So it's subject 11. So this is of interest. Maybe I just want to sort them. So I go here, Control Shift End, and I'm gonna sort. And I want to sort by my SMQs matched. So if I do that, I'm starting to see signals. It's grouping them for me. There's a couple of arthritis here. There's a couple of GI here. There's my hypersensitivity. There's a group here. There's a couple with no matches. And there's my SLE. I'm only seeing one case here, subject 13. But remember, this is your narrow. So how many rows did I get? I got a total output of 48 rows with a couple of headers because I'm only looking at it at narrow. When you have a large database, a very large database, and you want to do an overlook, maybe this is a nice way to start. You have focusing only on the specific matches because narrow will give you specific matches. So this is a nice way to start. But what about if I do my broad? How is it going to be different? So let's go back into the tool. Let me go back to the tab for my selection. And instead of narrow, now I'm going to hit broad. Now remember, when you hit broad, you never exclude narrow. You're never excluding narrow. Broad only means that you also want to add the broad terms. So let me do next. Let me choose my file again. I'm going to choose the same file. And I'm going to hit next. And now let's see how many I have. So again, gave me the same headers. I'm again able to save it, to sort it. But compared to 48 rows the first time round, let me just see. Now I have 96 rows. I have a lot more data. So in my first brush with my narrow, if there was an area that I thought was interesting and I want to see a bit more, I can do that. I can still data filter. I can still filter by my subjects. But now when I click one, I'm seeing more cases because here's my broad terms. Here's my under my column F, here's my broad terms. And not only is it giving me my broad terms, it's giving me which category is this broad term belonging to, and the status, is this active or not? Of course, my subject ID is still provided to me, and as well the hierarchical. So I still have the hierarchical output. They're all still available to me. So what happens now if I group them or sort them the way I did before? So let me go back again and do Control-Shift-End and do sort and select to sort by my SMQs matched. And now I'm seeing more clusters. I'm seeing more clusters. That doesn't mean I have more adverse events. I'm just hitting on more because now I'm looking at the broad terms as well. So for the acute pancreatitis, I'm seeing a lot more outputs here. Some of them are narrow. Actually, only one is narrow. The pancreatitis acute, so only subject 9. But now I'm seeing subjects 1 and 7 with the acute pancreatitis as broad. Are both of them significant, or maybe one of them is significant? Maybe that's a discussion I want to have with my medical monitor or my safety team. Or maybe I can run my algorithmic SMQs and find out. So when I did my narrow for acute pancreatitis, I only got the one subject, subject 9. When I did my broad, I got subject 9, subject 7, and subject 1. Subject 7 only had abdominal pain. So am I interested in subject 7 with only abdominal pain? Probably not. But if subject 1 only had abdominal distension, I may also ignore that subject, but they have two symptoms or two terms that are hitting on acute pancreatitis. Is subject 1 significant for acute pancreatitis? Do I have an algorithm for acute pancreatitis? Let me go back to my tool again. And this time, I'm going to run it against algorithmic. And yes, acute pancreatitis has an algorithm. I see it here. So what happens if I run with the algorithmic search? Let me run it with the algorithm. Click Next, choose my file, the same file, and click Next. And now I have a brand new output. And when I open this one up, this one is the shortest. Remember, we only have 10 algorithmic SMQs. So this one is the shortest, but it might be the most significant to me if my interest is one of those algorithmic SMQs, because look at this. When I'm looking at, and let me just data filter. When I'm looking at acute pancreatitis, It's only giving me those two subjects. The one with the narrow, that is very specific, and the one that matched on that algorithm with those two broad terms. It didn't even look at subject 7. Subject 7 only had one broad term. So I was able to kind of silence that noise. So when you are looking at these outputs, what is of interest to you? What is of interest to your team? Are you interested in algorithmic SMQ? If so, please use your subject IDs because this looks at the clustering on the subject level. Look at this cluster, systemic lupus. So if I filter by systemic lupus here, what am I getting? I'm getting two subjects, subject 13 and subject 14. So 13 is narrow. They have SLE arthritis. But subject 14 is hitting in this particular output. It's telling me I have a hit in this particular output because they have 3 broad terms in 3 different categories. Remember those many categories we saw for SLE. And the total for this 3 adds up to 7. It's a weighted approach. So because these 3 belong to the same patient and the total for the weight was 7, it told me this is a case of interest for you for SLE, my subject 14. Well, did my subject 14 hit on the rest? Let's take a look. Here I am back to my broad. Let me filter, and I'm pulling my SLE, right? That's the one I'm looking for. Let's look at systemic lupus. Systemic lupus, not only in the narrow and broad, not only pulled up subject 13 and subject 14, it also pulled up subject 15. But why did it pull up subject 15? Well, they had 3 different terms from 3 different categories, but the total weight for subject 15 was not 7. 3 plus 3 is 6. So it didn't meet the criteria. So for this particular subject, they had epilepsy, pleural effusion, and photodermatosis. The total did not meet that threshold of more than 6, 7 or higher for it to hit on an SLE. What about my narrow output? Did my narrow output give me anything? So this was my narrow output. If I filter by SLE, I'm only seeing the one subject 13 because I told the tool only give me the narrow. So this hopefully gives you an idea of how you can leverage the tool on your own data. You don't need to be an IT person to run the tool. You don't need to be a programmer to run the tool. The tool is available to you at your desk. If you want a quick look and you don't want to bother other people, or other people have a wait time to get back to you, you can run the tool on your own and take a quick look. Okay, so let me go back to my slides. Hannah, any questions at this point?
I am still not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay. All right, so when we first ran the tool, we said that the tool can be accessed from the blue buttons on top across the ribbon. Whether you are in your SOC view or your SMQ view, you can run the tool. You can run it against narrow, broad, hierarchical, or algorithmic. The broad search will give you everything. It will give you all the terms that hit within that SMQ, whether they are narrow or whether they are broad. So it's your largest output. The SMQ analysis tool in the output report will allow you to export it as an Excel, and that shows you which were narrow, which were broad, which were hierarchical. And if you chose the narrow or the broad, it's not going to tell you algorithmic. The algorithmic has to be selected specifically in the tool to run the algorithm. But of course, it will still tell you the SLEs narrow, the SLEs broad. And the algorithmic search, or the algorithmic running of the tool itself, that gives you the specific algorithmic output, which is subject specific. So what kind of applications can we think about when we talk about SMQs? So the intent of the SMQs is to help you identify cases of interest that are highly likely to match your medical condition that you're interested in. So when you're looking at your SMQs, you do have the option to look through the entirety of the SMQs as a screening. And that may be helpful to you if you're just starting out, you don't have a fully established safety profile, or maybe you run them on a regular basis as a safety screening tool. That's also an option to you. And that's something commonly practiced in clinical trials. So many companies, what they do is they run the entirety of the SMQs as a narrow look, on a regular basis. And then if they start seeing things, they go into a deeper dive with the broad search or the algorithmic search. If you already have an identified safety issue, so let's say you had preclinical data, or your product belongs to a class and it's known to have a specific kind of effect, then you may want to be targeting your look. Then you may want to select a specific SMQ or even a sub SMQ, or you may want to just run it on your narrow search because you know that you're focused in on a specific area of interest. In the post-marketing world, you can use selected SMQs, again, if you have a suspected or a known safety issue, so you can run it selectively, or if you want to run multiple SMQs, again, for a broader look or a regular frequent look as a safety precaution, you can do that for signal detection. Single case alerts are also interesting. So this will need a conversation with your database programmer to say, listen, I'm interested in acute pancreatitis because in my data so far, I hit on a couple. So here's the list, like you did your export SMQ from the web-based browser. Here's the list of all the PTs that belong to acute pancreatitis. Can you please program it so that if any data comes in from any of my research sites or from any of my post-marketing sites or from any of my reporters, if any data comes in that matches any of the PTs on this list, I want you to give me a case alert. I want to be alerted in my inbox. So please, can you do that? So you have the information to give to your programmers if you're interested in single case alerts, and of course for aggregate reporting. So you can use the SMQs for periodic reporting. You can use them to identify any lack of efficacy, etc. So let me give you two kind of clinical scenarios. Here's scenario one. So you're working in a company and they're developing a new drug and you're responsible for the safety risk analysis, the safety benefit, the risk benefit analysis. And the indication is onychomycosis. The projection is 8 years worth of research and development with a total estimated cost of 1.2 billion. So your first thought when you're doing the risk benefit analysis is what am I trying to cure? What am I trying to address? So your problem, your medical problem, is actually toenail fungus. That's onychomycosis. So it's not really a life-threatening condition. So okay, you start with the data collection, and you decide that you're going to be running the SMQs against your data. It's a brand new product, so you don't have existing data, so you run it against everything. And you do it periodically as part of your surveillance. Once you hit the 1,000 patient exposures, you identified that you had 5 cases of hemolytic anemia. So hemolytic anemia is actually a serious condition. The hemolytic anemia can cause heart failure. It can cause pulmonary hypertension. You may end up with very, very sick people needing a long-term care, and this is not a risk that you're comfortable with because you're only treating toenail fungus. So you make your analysis and you decide that this is unfavorable. You want to have a serious discussion with your development team, and you present to your management that based on your conclusion, this is actually putting patients at risk, and maybe it's time to pull the plug. So your management team is going to do their own review and agree with you that for the sake of patient safety, it's not worth pursuing this product. And you can identify that early. So it really saves your company time. So well done. Here's your second scenario. This time, it's not a brand new drug. This is the fourth drug in a specific therapeutic class, but it's being used for a very, very sick group of patients. So you are more comfortable with a bit more risk. And you already know that there are risks inherent in this particular therapeutic class of products, because this class of products is associated with high blood pressure and angioedema. It's a known risk, but it's an acceptable risk based on the seriousness of your target disease. Okay, so now how are you looking at your data? You already know you have risks inherent in that class. So you want to focus your attention on two SMQs, the hypertension because you have high blood pressure, and the angioedema because you know that's a risk in this particular class. And you start running your data against these two SMQs on a regular basis. And as your data comes in and is expanding, you keep running them regularly. But you're finding it surprising that you're not finding hits against your data. So you keep running against these two SMQs, but you're not getting hits. So what is this telling you? Really, what this is telling you is that your particular drug may be a safer option than the other three that are already on the market. And if you share that with your team, that is wonderful news. So even not finding hits in the SMQ is significant when you do it comparatively, right? So if you're comparing against other drugs, other indications for the same drug, or across time. So let's talk a little bit about customized searches, and this will be the last topic for today. So MedDRA is a standardized hierarchy. We said you cannot modify MedDRA as a hierarchy. SMQs are standardized MedDRA queries. You should not modify SMQs unless you have a compelling reason. So sometimes the SMQ itself may have a large number of preferred terms in it, and you run it again and again and again, and one of them is just giving you noise. You've already investigated this particular preferred term, and it's just giving you noise. And you say, okay, there's no point in keeping this. So let's say, for example, it's dyspnea, or it's a PT of ECG changes. It's non-specific, but it's part of your SMQ build. It's part of the standardized SMQ. But you kept finding it as noise, and you investigated enough of them to know that this particular term is not significant for me. So you decide to exclude it. Once you make that decision, then that's no longer an SMQ because it's no longer the standardized query. Now it's a modified query based on an SMQ. You can do that because you have a compelling reason. You have a large number of data that was just coming out as noise. Excluding it helped you focus on the significant cases. But once you made that decision, a few things to bear in mind. One, it's not an SMQ anymore. It's an MMQ. It's a modified MedDRA query. Two, you have to document what you did before you submit to the regulatory authorities or before you share with your team. And this documentation has to be maintained, and you have to say whether or not you're going to be doing it with every release of MedDRA. So as the MedDRA versions are being released, the MedDRA team, the MSSO team, is maintaining that SMQ, but now the onus on you to maintain the MMQ because now it's modified. One point worth mentioning is one of the SMQs, which is lack of efficacy, lack of effect, that is a typical SMQ that gets modified because every single product is meant for a different indication. So how would you assess if it's not working other than by introducing terms in your query that reflect that the product is not working based on that particular indication? What you're expecting to see is not happening, or the opposite of it is happening, and every single product has a different expected to see outcome. So that's an SMQ that's typically modified. Okay, when you are creating your own customized query, yes, you can. You can create your own query. You don't have to use any of those 110 or 230 sub SMQs. You don't have to use them. If you have your own area of interest, you can. Where you get started, well, you need medical knowledge of your product, what you're expecting to see, and what you're worried about seeing. So you need a cross-functional discussion. So this is to create a customized search is an area where a cross-functional discussion is very, very important for your success. So you need folks who have medical background, folks who know the product and how it works, folks who know MedDRA and how MedDRA is built, and the different levels and hierarchies of MedDRA and how it's connected to different system organ classes, because you want to be able to retrieve terms that are relevant to you regardless of which system organ class it falls under. Whether it's, like we said, if it's a kidney disorder that you're interested in, start with the renal system organ class, but don't forget that you have investigations, renal function tests that are relevant to you that are going to be in the investigation system organ class. Don't forget that there are certain medical procedures or medical surgeries that may be relevant to you that are in the surgical system organ class. Don't forget that there may be social circumstances or pre-existing conditions or risk factors that are in the social circumstances system organ class. There may be signs and symptoms that are outside of your renal system. They may fall under general system organ class or injury system organ class, or even pregnancy and perinatal condition system organ class. So when you're building your own customized query, please don't forget to have somebody who's knowledgeable of MedDRA and the MedDRA hierarchy and the MedDRA build that will help you find all of these different terms that are relevant to you. And this particular topic is discussed with a demo offered in the data retrieval and query building with MedDRA webinar. And there's also details on that in that PTC document for data retrieval and presentation points to consider. Once you arrive at an agreement of all the PTs and all the terms that are relevant to you, that you have collected, please document it, because you're going to forget these discussions. You're going to forget why this particular PT was included or excluded. And if your team members change, or if someone new is added, or if someone who was involved in this process leaves, how are you going to continue with the maintenance of that knowledge? How are you going to preserve that information? So please save your query and please maintain your query. So, okay, you created it now, you're at version 27. What happens in version 27.1 if one of the preferred terms in your list happen to now be demoted to an LLT? Do you still want to keep it? Do you want to change it? What happens to maybe 100 or so new preferred terms that were added to 27.1? Are any of those relevant to you? So once you create your own customized query, please remember that there is a responsibility to maintain it. And when you present your data to your maybe research partners or to your regulators, you have to include the documentation, how you created it and which version you used, how you maintained it. And of course, if it's a useful one, this customized query, please send it to the MSSO and suggest it as a topic for future build of an SMQ. We are always willing to review these and have the discussion run by the medical team at the MSSO. This concluded the presentation, but Hannah, before I summarize, do we have any questions?
We have received one question. It asks, can we run product-specific search for SMQs, where we are interested to know about a specific SMQ search for a specific product or therapeutic class?
Such a good question, so thank you for that. The intent of MedDRA is to be standardized across different therapeutic uses, different products, different indications, different regions, different manufacturers, different patient populations, and across time. So MedDRA was intended to bypass that kind of specificity for the product, for the drug, for the vaccine, for the biologic. So the intent of MedDRA is to be able to standardize the safety signals coming out regardless of the product. So hopefully that answers your question, but please come back to us if not. Any other questions?
That is it for the moment.
Okay, so in this webinar, we went over the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. We showed you where to find that document, so please download it, please take a look at it. It's really super helpful. We discussed the characteristics, the uses, the applications, the benefits of the SMQs, including customizations. We went over the demo and we showed typical examples of 2 clinical scenarios of how that happens. The slides have been made available to you, and the slides have contact information that is helpful to you, like the frequently asked questions, where you can access the browsers or the different kinds of browsers, how you can find our training schedule and sign up for future webinars on different topics, or that data query and MedDRA and the query building with MedDRA webinar, if you're interested in that one, and where to find the support documentation. So one final shot. Please feel free to ask questions now. Otherwise, we can wrap up. Any questions coming in, Hannah?
Let's see, I'm not seeing any new ones. We'll give everyone just one more minute to see if there's any last minute questions.
Okay, and of course, you can always come back to us, to our help desk with your questions. We're happy to address them that way as well. Okay, so if there are no questions, thank you all for your time today. Appreciate you joining us, and we hope to see you in a future webinar. Have a great one.